Thank you. The next item of business is a debate on motion 19970 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville on uniting local and national efforts across sectors to end violence against women and girls. I would invite those members who wish to speak in the debate to please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Cabinet Secretary Shirley Ann Somerville to speak to and to move the motion. Up to 13 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I move the motion in my name. As I open our annual debate marking the 16 Days campaign against gender-based violence, I reflect once again on the continued importance of this debate and its important part in the parliamentary calendar. Because as 2025 draws to a close, violence, abuse and misogyny remain a grim everyday reality for women and girls in Scotland. And while real strides have been made to ensure women and girls can be equally safe, we have so much more to do. And this is in part because violence against women and girls evolves. The tools that perpetrators have to draw on evolve. The rapid evolution of technology has created new tools for abuse. Home security systems, wearable devices and AI-generated deepfake images are increasingly enabling the mass creation and sharing of exploitative content. Research indicates a proliferation of harm towards girls online. A recent survey by Girl Guiding reported that 77% of girls and young women aged 7 to 21 have experienced online harm in the past year. And for those reasons, this government acknowledges the importance of the UN Women's theme, Unite to End Digital Abuse. Online abuse has wide-reaching impacts. Beyond the direct harassment, it limits women's and girls' ability to take part in online spaces, to learn, to voice opinions, to socialise, or even to do their jobs. As our Equally Safe strategy outlines, technology-facilitated violence against women and girls is both a cause and a consequence of gender inequality. It happens because of women's unequal position in society, and it exacerbates that inequality by limiting the freedom, choices and opportunities of women and girls. And exposure to online content harms boys too. At an age when boys are questioning their identity and searching for belonging, online spaces increasingly provide a warped framework for an understanding of gender roles and societal norms. And misogyny is potentially now being written into our future. AI and emerging technologies are not neutral. They, unless specifically designed with care and with women and girls in mind, replicate existing biases, particularly sexism and racism. Social media platforms are fueling hatred against women with algorithms, datasets, systems and search engines delivering sexist, sexualised and abusive content, even to those not actively seeking it. They often promote harmful messages that equate masculinity with dominance over women, emotional suppression and aggressive behaviour. And if we do not find an effective way to regulate now, these systemic biases will become further entrenched. We are storing up problems for the future. Now, there are not any easy answers for any legislator, for any government or indeed for society as a whole. The speed of change can feel alarming, but together we have to find a way. Now, I note the guidance published by Ofcom at the start of this year's 16 Days campaign. It includes a range of practical safety measures that the regulator is urging tech firms to adopt to tackle these harms. In this Parliament today, I urge tech companies to take immediate action in line with the guidance. Indeed, I urge them to go above and beyond what is needed to comply with their legal duties under the Online Safety Act. We need to be ambitious in the standards we set for women and girls' online safety, and I know many campaigners are concerned that the guidance doesn't go far enough. Now, of course, internet services are reserved. This government has worked with the UK Government to get the Online Safety Act amended and strengthened, but we are clear that we must continue to press for further protections. In January this year, the Minister for Children, Young People and the Promise and the Minister for Victims and Community Safety wrote to UK ministers inviting further cooperation between the governments on online safety, particularly in relation to protecting children and young people, and urged for further legislative action. And we will continue to work with the UK Government to do all we can to protect our citizens from online harm. Indeed, ministers met with Jess Phillips, the UK Minister for Safeguarding and Violence Against Women and Girls, in October to discuss our shared aims of protecting children and young people from online harms and tackling violence against women and girls. The First Minister, Minister for Victims and Community Safety and the Minister for Children and Young People in the Promise have all written to tech companies about the need to take meaningful and tangible action to tackle online harms, and will continue to press that point. Within devolved powers, the Scottish Government is proposing to consult on potential new criminal law and associated measures to tackle online harm. This is in response to growing concerns around the effectiveness of existing legislation and the ability to progress through the justice system. The consultation will seek views on proposals to create a new offence to criminalise the non-consensual creation of deepfake images. This is due to the growth of apps which enable people to create deepfake pornographic images of another person. Now, of course, we have already enacted criminal law to tackle people who share or threaten to share deepfake, intimate or pornographic images with another person without their consent. And through the UK Government, we are informing the Developing Council of Europe instrument and recommendations in relation to combating technology-facilitated violence against women and girls. In recognition of the significant and wide-ranging risk of harm, the First Minister established the Online Safety Task Force with joint ministerial leadership from the Minister for Children, Young People and the Promise and the Minister for Victims and Community Safety to provide oversight and direction across the Scottish Government. It is reviewing current activity and considering priorities for action within the devolved powers that are available to the Scottish Government. In order to end violence and discrimination against women and girls, men and boys must be seen as much more than part of the problem. They have to be integral to the solution. Research indicates that a rise in misogynistic content within digital echo chambers presents particular challenges for secondary school-aged young people. And so we are in the process of co-creating a campaign with young people. Co-creation is critical to developing credible and effective messaging that reflects young people's lived digital experiences and understanding of misogyny. And I want to thank the young people and the third sector experts who continue to work with us to shape this campaign, and look forward to updating Parliament ahead of the proposed launch date in February 2026. To demonstrate how successful campaign work can be, it is worth reflecting on last year's sextortion campaign developed with Police Scotland and Crime Stoppers Youth Service, Fearless. It is believed to be a key factor in the 32.2% decrease in reports of sextortion in 2024 compared to 2023, seen by Police Scotland. Our Preventing and Responding to Gender-Based Violence framework for schools is clear about the need to create a positive, safe school culture. We are also committed to supporting Time for Inclusive Education's new digital discourse initiative. This helps schools to equip children and young people with the skills to navigate the digital media and counters the impacts of disinformation and online hate. We are delighted to have been able to support the first stage of this work to help teachers and learners with skills to tackle this issue. Of course, the online world is not always negative, and we know that the digital space offers opportunities for services and survivors. Those working with survivors of abuse have told us that digital delivery is an integral part of the support they offer. And this is particularly the case for organisations supporting younger women. It enables increased access to choice and, in some circumstances, expanding offers of support. This includes video calls and apps for one-to-one and group support and counselling, as well as online chat as a helpline option. QR codes can enable discreet access to information where picking up a leaflet would immediately identify the woman as a possible victim. And that is why we have established a Violence Against Women and Girls Digital Inclusion Network, made up of specialist violence against women and girls services, the More Collective and others, to consider how we can improve access to information and advice for survivors of technological facilitated violence against women and girls. Presiding Officer, I'd like to end my opening remarks by paying tribute to the extraordinary work of Violence Against Women services across Scotland. These support services are life-saving, but it's not just in the vital area of direct support and advocacy that these services are making a difference. Extraordinary work is being done to raise awareness, to educate and to prevent violence before it begins. And to each and every one of them, I give my thanks. Presiding Officer, as I said at the beginning of my remarks, it is important for legislators and governments to face up to the challenges of the technological changes that our society is facing. These are difficult. Perhaps we are often criticised as parliaments and in governments for acting too slowly, for implementing too slowly, or to be reflecting on a debate that is already passed in society as they have moved on to other things. It is a challenge all of us will need to rise to in the next session, and I move the motion in my name.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I now call on Tess White to speak to and to move Amendment 1997.0.2 up to 9 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I move the amendment in my name. Violence against women and girls can be physical, sexual or psychological. Violence against women and girls and misogynistic violence are on the increase. Fact. The SNP's Equally Safe strategy is failing, and we're facing a national emergency, and it's not just digital. The number of sexual assault cases has risen by 4% since 2024. The number of annually recorded incidents of domestic abuse has had a near 55% increase in over 20 years. Scottish authorities have identified multiple clusters of child grooming in Fife, North Lanarkshire and Inverclyde. The number of rape and attempted rape cases have risen by 11% since 2024. Presiding Officer, I don't know who's talking, but I'm finding it off-putting. In Glasgow alone, 1,200 women have received treatment for FGM in the last 5 years.
Ms White, I'm sorry, I'm just not hearing what you're hearing.
Thank you,
Please
Presiding
continue.
Officer. The Scottish Government's definition of violence against women and girls views gender inequality as a root cause of such violence. Now, does the Scottish Government mean sex, biological sex, or do they mean gender? Because the two are completely different. The Equalities Committee discovered that the public sector equality duties with sex, not gender, as one of the 9 protected characteristics, was not being monitored correctly, and risk assessments are hit and miss in Scotland. Language matters, Presiding Officer, data matters, and outcomes matter. Female genital mutilation only affects girls and women. FGM is a painful procedure that involves cutting or altering the external female genitalia. Like all other forms of violence against women, FGM is practised because of deep-rooted systemic inequalities that discriminate against women and girls. And because it's frequently done to girls, it's child abuse. The Female Genital Mutilation Act 2020 has not been implemented. The Women's Support Project has said that the Alnisa service in NHS Lothian reports a 50% increase in FGM cases in 2023. Prohibition of Female Genital Mutilation Scotland Act 2005 made it an offence to have FGM carried out abroad with a maximum penalty of 14 years. The 2020 Act aimed to strengthen the legal protection for women and girls at risk of FGM, yet, as we've heard from the topical questions today, 5 years on, this is not in force. It's still not in force, and there have been no people convicted in Scottish courts for offences under this Act. No one has been prosecuted in this country. As Rebecca McCurdy in the Herald only yesterday said, the failure to enforce is a 5-year betrayal of women. Women who contributed to the bill are right to be disappointed, and that's an understatement. Women experiencing abuse struggle to get justice, and the legal aid system is broken. We're at a crisis point. Scotland faces problems with misogyny, while the SNP has dropped plans for misogyny legislation. Earlier this year, a report found that there is evidence of sexism, misogyny and violence against women within Police Scotland at both institutional and individual level. Misogyny has been identified in Scotland's schools, with a report finding that female teachers and pupils face frequent abuse and sexual taunts. I'd just like to also pick up on a point that the Cabinet Secretary said about schools. that we must have a positive and safe culture within our schools, Cabinet Secretary, but it's getting worse rather than better. This is a crisis in our school system, and child-accessible pornography has become a huge issue. In April, the Supreme Court ruled that the Scottish Government's interpretation of sex was wrong. In the case of 4 Women Scotland versus the Scottish Ministers, the Supreme Court ruled that the legal definition of a woman is based on biological sex. The SNP government are still refusing to amend their policy, allowing biological men in women's prisons. SNP ministers are defending their policy to allow criminals who identify as women to serve sentences in female jails. The Sullivan Review noted that conflating sex and gender identity undermines trust in public services. By recording biological sex accurately to services, particularly for women who rely on single-sex spaces for safety and dignity, for example in domestic abuse refuges, prisons or hospital wards. Safety matters, Presiding Officer. Women are being let down when they're at their most vulnerable. In the WN report on safety in our hospitals, of the 198 hospitals subject to FOI requests to Police Scotland, 133 were unable to respond, stating the data was not kept, and that's shocking. It's also deeply troubling that in the 57 hospitals that did retain data, 276 sexual assaults and 12 rapes were recorded. Sexual assaults were recorded in at least 13 of the 18 psychiatric hospitals. The incidence of assaults in psychiatric hospitals was highlighted as a major concern, and I have 2 spine-chilling cases in my own constituency. Non-fatal strangulation. NFS is increasing as a severe form of domestic abuse. In June 2022, England and Wales made NFS a standalone crime, followed by Ireland in 2023. US legislation has made strangulation a serious standalone criminal offence, which has been linked to reduced intimate partner homicide rates, with 14% fewer women killed. The Act can cause brain damage, organ failure, mental ill health and death. The evidence indicates that non-fatal strangulation laws reduce intimate partner homicides, yet the Scottish Government still won't have it as a standalone crime. Why not, when the evidence is so compelling? In conclusion, Presiding Officer, we support making NFS a standalone crime. We need to support Dr Pam Gossell's Prevention of Domestic Abuse Scotland Bill. We must have an inquiry into grooming gangs in Scotland. In 2026, there must be a prosecution for female genital mutilation, and the Scottish Government needs to deliver single-sex spaces to keep women safe. The vast majority of people in Scotland now see the cult of gender ideology as harmful to women and girls, and no one, not even the Scottish Government, is above the law. To end with the words of the treasured Scottish poet Maggie Gibson, as a thank you to all the courageous women who are fighting for the rights and safety of women and girls in Scotland today. Thankfully, this crazy spinning globe is blessed with women holding up their half of the sky, and more warrior women, battle-wearied, bone-tired, soul-sore, while systems form to keep them down, oppressed, powered by politicians dumbed as Clydesdale ponies, ploughing ever deeper the same old furrows as they lumber onward, blinkered, never turning to see exhausted women's bodies piling up behind. Presiding Officer, immediate action is required. Women won't wait.
Thank you, Ms White. Could I take this opportunity to remind those members who are seeking to speak in the debate to check that they have pressed the request to speak button. I now call on Katie Clark to open on behalf of Scottish Labour. Up to 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm pleased to open this debate for Scottish Labour and to reaffirm our support for the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. For over 30 years, the 16 Days campaign has raised international awareness of gender-based violence and the need for action to tackle it. We want to commend the work of the campaign and the thousands of organisations, including here in Scotland, who have supported it. This year's 16 Days campaign is welcome as it highlights the growing threat that online spaces, services and technologies pose in terms of gender-based violence. Digital violence is now one of the fastest growing forms of abuse against women and girls, with digital tools being used by men to engage in harassment and abuse on a daily basis. Digital tools have empowered men and boys to engage in new kinds of abuse and violence, such as revenge porn, deepfakes, catfishing and trolling. And I welcome the Cabinet Secretary's proposal on deepfakes and look forward to considering them in detail. Digital violence has also negatively impacted the mental health and well-being of women and girls. It often leads to offline forms of abuse and violence, including femicide. The level of digital violence experienced and witnessed by women and girls in Scotland is particularly shocking. Over a third of women in Scotland have witnessed online violence, and more than 1 in 6 have experienced it. Online violence is an even greater problem amongst younger women in Scotland, with nearly 30% of those aged 16 to 24 having experienced it. 6 in 10 who have experienced online violence also reported endured negative impacts on their mental health and well-being. Women and girls across Scotland also lack confidence in both the Scottish Government and Police Scotland to tackle online violence. Over 3/4 of women who reported online violence were not satisfied with the outcome. More than 60% of women believe that the police lack the necessary resources to tackle online violence. Women and girls in Scotland are also more likely to seek support from friends than the police when experiencing online violence, and less than 15% of women have confidence that the Scottish Government is doing all it can to tackle online violence. I was pleased to lead Scottish Labour's consultation on ending violence against women and girls alongside Pauline McNeill, MSP, earlier this Parliament. Respondents to our consultation made it clear that there must be better controls available on online platforms and that social media companies should be legally accountable for online violence that occurs on their platforms. So while the Online Safety Act and Ofcom's new guidelines on improving online safety for women and girls are welcome, there is clearly much more that can be done, such as exploring the introduction of legal requirements on social media companies. Respondents also highlighted the need for Police Scotland to be better resourced and for the creation of specific offences in terms of cyber flashing and the creation of intimate images. While the Scottish Government's motion focuses on digital violence, we must also recognise that this is an issue which affects women and girls in all areas of life, including in public spaces like schools and workplaces. I commend trade unions like Unite, Unison, EIS, RMT, TSSA, USDAW and many others who have published reports on the ongoing and outlining the growing scale of the problem in recent years. The NASWT found that nearly half of female teachers in Scotland have experienced physical abuse or violence from pupils in the last year. The public sector trade union Unison have exposed the shocking rates of violence faced by workers across the public sector. Unite, RMT and TSSA have highlighted the increase in violence and sexual attacks on our trains and buses, including particularly against female members of staff. And the transport unions are calling for a specific offence of assaulting a public sector transport worker similar to that we've created for retail workers. Sexual harassment is endemic in Scotland's workplaces, with nearly 10% of women workers having experienced work-related sexual assault. But despite this alarming scale of violence across Scotland, we have to accept that government efforts have been largely ineffective in tackling the issue. Just a third of Scotland's schools are signed up to the Equally Safe programme. Less than half of rape and attempted rape cases make it to court and result in a prosecution conviction once they get there. Domestic abuse and sexual crimes are reportedly on the rise. cuts have been made to the funding for rape crisis and other support services for women and girls experiencing violence. In my own region, there are campaigns for CCTV in parks after rape and sexual assaults. Our train network has seen both fewer staff and reduced ticket office opening hours. And as Tess White said, the Scottish Government has abandoned its misogyny bill. There are clear actions that the Scottish Government which could take now which would help to tackle violence against women and girls. For example, we must introduce a cross-campus strategy in all of our schools to address sexism and misogyny and the growing influence of far-right social media on the behaviour of young men and boys in schools and indeed in other educational institutions across Scotland. I welcome this debate today, but I hope in the upcoming budget ministers are able to provide sustainable funding for support services for women and girls, including an expansion of the pilot on independent legal representation for rape victims and indeed reliable funding for rape crisis and women's aid. Scottish Labour will support the Scottish Government's motion today due to our shared commitment to tackling violence against women and girls, but we are clear that more can and must be done, and we will work across this chamber to achieve that.
Thank you, Ms Clark. And I call on Maggie Chapman to open on behalf of the Scottish Greens. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As I start, I refer members to my register of interests. I worked for a rape crisis centre before my election. You deserve to be punched, and then some. That's surely a bloke. You need dealt with. Go to Palestine then and see how they treat women there. You're an it. Why don't you F off back to Rhodesia? These are all direct quotes from comments on my own social media. A pretty sanitised selection, I have to say, but a wonderful mixture of sexist violence and imperial misogyny, nonetheless. And this is just the tiniest drops in the ocean of online violence that women and girls face all the time. Presiding Officer, during these 16 days of activism, we gather again to confront a truth that should haunt us all. Violence against women and girls is not only pervasive, it is deeply political. It is produced and reproduced by the patriarchy, by inequality, by systems and structures that place men's comfort above women's safety every single day. As the saying goes, to those accustomed to privilege, equality feels like oppression. Engender's briefing lays it bare. Violence is endemic. Nearly 64,000 domestic abuse incidents, rising sexual violence, growing online abuse. 1 in 6 women in Scotland have experienced digital violence, and young men being radicalised into misogynistic extremism at alarming rates. As Katie Clark has already outlined, the 2023 survey by the Open University found 17% of women have experienced online violence. The figure is much higher for younger women. Over a third have witnessed online violence. 71% believe that current legislation is ineffective. 11% of women who experienced online violence say this progressed to offline violence. Online anonymity, ease of getting away with it, and misogyny, the most common perceived reasons for why people, mostly men, commit online violence against women and girls. Nearly a third of those who experienced online violence were more likely to seek support from friends than the police. Over 3/4 of those who reported online violence were not satisfied with the outcome. 85% said it affected them, with 6 in 10 reporting it had a negative impact on their mental health and well-being. These numbers are horrific, but behind them are real stories which are worse. One survivor recently recalls, "He didn't need to hit me on the street. He could reach me on every device I owned. I felt like there was nowhere in the world that he couldn't get to." Another said, "I stopped reporting because nothing changed, except the threats got worse." And another, "I reported every threat he made online, screenshots, timestamps, everything. They told me it was just words. 2 weeks later, he was at my door." These are not isolated stories. They are the reality for thousands of women across Scotland. And digital violence is not separate from real-world violence. It is the same violence, delivered through new tools, tools that are designed, owned and regulated overwhelmingly by men and used by the far right to radicalise, recruit and spread hatred. And we must be absolutely clear, the far right does not protect women. They harm women. They use our safety as a weapon to justify racism, transphobia and attacks on migrants. Yet many who shout loudest about protecting our women are themselves perpetrators of abuse. Last year's riot arrests tell us that plainly, as does what I've witnessed personally on the streets of Aberdeen and Dundee. Misogyny is the gateway drug of extremist politics. But misogyny is not only out there, it is here too, in this political environment, in our work communities, in this building. Women MSPs, along with women of colour, disabled women and trans women, know that our everyday online spaces are filled with misogynistic threats. And we know that some of that hostility is fuelled, directly or recklessly, deliberately or not, by political actors. When fellow parliamentarians share or encourage posts that identify women MSPs who vote in certain ways on sensitive topics, they effectively create targeted lists. They are actively making us less safe. Calling this accountability is a grotesque distortion. It is intimidation. And those parliamentarians who have done this should be ashamed of themselves. This behaviour must end. We cannot ignore either those who are most at risk. Trans women, non-binary people experience even higher levels of violence. Sex workers pushed underground by criminalisation are made less safe by our laws. Migrant women with no recourse to public funds remain trapped with abusers because our system denies them the means to survive with dignity and independently. Disabled women face disproportionate levels of coercive control. Racism compounds misogyny. All of this is part of the same structure of gendered oppression. If we want to end violence, we have to dismantle the patriarchy, and that requires primary prevention, the deep structural work that Engender and others rightly demand. It requires embedding women's equality in every policy area: housing, transport, education, planning, social security. It requires challenging toxic masculinity and harmful gender norms, and it requires political courage. Survivors are tired of our caution. As one woman said, "I kept waiting for someone to be brave enough to say the real problem is men's violence and to deal with it. I'm still waiting." If we are serious about eliminating gender-based violence, these kinds of comments cannot go unacted upon. Let's be brave today. Let's name the problem, the patriarchy, structural sexist violence. Let's commit to real change. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. And I now call on Alex Cole-Hamilton to open on behalf of Scottish Liberal Democrats. Up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm very glad to be opening for the Liberal Democrats in this important debate. But before I go any further, can I thank Maggie Chapman for what was a typically excellent contribution and salute her indefatigability for sharing with us, I think, some appalling examples of online abuse that she personally has received. I'm aware that many female colleagues in this chamber will have received similar, and I stand with them in both friendship and solidarity, so my support to them. But it is, I think, underlines the reach of the challenge before us. I'm grateful for the government's tone that they've sought to foster and the tone of the motion that Shirley-Ann Somerville has brought to the chamber today. Presiding Officer, violence against women and girls is a national emergency. It's an emergency that is deeply rooted in misogyny and the patriarchy, enabled by silence and worsened by systems that still fall far of our expectations and fail survivors far too often. Today's debate gives us the chance to speak with one voice in this chamber by condemning it. Violence against women and girls has no place in our country, in our homes, in our society, neither in our workplace or our classrooms. But just saying so is not enough. We have to act, and act with the seriousness this emergency demands of us. The UN's 16 days of activism campaign begins this week. It shines a light on something every woman in this country already knows, that the abuse and harassment they have faced for far too long has now shifted into new venues, into new frontiers. The digital sphere has become new, deeply damaging frontline in this age-old problem. We've heard something of that today. I was reflecting on the fact, Presiding Officer, that the first time I spoke in a debate like this, on the eve of the 16 days of activism, was 9 years ago. 9 years ago, AI was barely an academic concept. But now, systems within the phones held in our pockets, in our computers, in our laptops, allow people to track someone's location without their knowledge. AI can be weaponized to create intimate images that were never even taken. And women are being harassed, threatened and manipulated from behind anonymous accounts. This is a crisis that is evolving faster than the laws that we can pass here are meant to protect women. But violence is not just moving online. Tragically, it is rising everywhere. The most recent crime figures show a 22% increase in reported domestic abuse in the last year alone. Reported rape and attempted rape have risen by 11%. Presiding Officer, that is outrageous. That is an indictment of our ability to grapple with this issue. Behind every statistic is a woman who was victimised and picked up when she picked up the phone to ask for help. Far too many still feel they cannot. I want to pay tribute to my colleague Beatrice Wishart, who has been a tireless and compassionate champion for women and girls, especially through her work as Deputy Convener on the cross-party group on men's violence against women and girls. Her leadership is invaluable. But Beatrice will be the first to say that leadership across this chamber must be collective. It must involve men too. This is an issue where we must all speak with that one voice. My party believes the government must take the following actions to address this emergency. It must finally commence Part 1 of the Domestic Abuse Act. The emergency protections they contain therein could be shielding women from danger right now. Instead, they've sat on the shelf for years. Every delay has consequences and survivors cannot wait any longer. Second, we must swiftly add sex as a protected characteristic under the Hate Crime and Public Order Act. And in the next Parliament, we should review whether a separate piece of legislation, such as the approach recommended by Baroness Helena Kennedy, is needed to properly tackle misogynistic harassment and hate. Third, we must protect girls in our schools. Reports of sexual harassment, coercion and assault among pupils have grown significantly. However, guidance for schools and local authorities is inconsistent. Girls deserve to learn without fear, and teachers deserve clarity and support. We must ensure they get both. And, Presiding Officer, we must make it easier for survivors to report abuse and to find help. Currently, too many women are forced to retell the trauma of their experience to a revolving door of agencies and departments. That is why we propose establishing a single point of contact in every local authority about abuse. So survivors only have to tell their story once and can be guided through the system with dignity and without that re-traumatisation. We need to address abuse in our criminal justice system and train lawyers and judges to understand when legal abuse, when coercion through the courts is taking place. Because we all know, we will all have casework examples from our constituencies where an abusive partner who's declared bankruptcy and qualifies for legal aid will use that reality to try and ruin financially their victim. We must also ensure every housing officer and frontline worker is trained to identify domestic abuse and respond properly to survivors. Frontline staff are often the first people to see what is happening behind closed doors. They must be equipped to act. And finally, we must adopt a presumption that the perpetrator, in cases of domestic violences, that they're the ones to leave the shared home and not the victim. It's barbaric that so many women and children are still forced to flee the place that they should feel the safest. If someone chooses violence, they should lose their home, not the person that they harmed. Presiding Officer, this isn't a woman's issue. It's not a party political issue. It's a national issue. It's a human issue, and one that demands every ounce of our collective political will. Scottish Liberal Democrats stand ready to work with every party in this chamber to stamp out gendered violence, whether it occurs or wherever it occurs, in whatever form it takes. Women and girls across Scotland deserve nothing less. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Cole-Hamilton. We will now move to the open debate. Backbench speeches of up to 6 minutes. I call Michelle Thompson to be followed by Pam Gozo. Ms Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In this debate today to mark the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, I think we're united in our commitment to end violence against women and girls in all its forms, online and offline. And as has been said, this is not just a women's issue. It's a societal crisis that demands action from every sector, every community and every individual. So let us begin by confronting a difficult but urgent reality: the pervasive nature of online pornography and its impact on young people, especially boys. Recent research by the Children's Commissioner for England has revealed a disturbing link between boys' exposure to violent pornography and subsequent harmful sexual behaviour. In half of the cases examined, acts of sexual violence depicted in pornography, such as strangulation or slapping, were mirrored in real-life abuse amongst children. Boys, in particular, are more likely to actively seek out pornography, and repeated exposure normalises shock and confusion, making harmful behaviours seem acceptable. By the age of 15, the majority of boys have seen pornography, and a significant proportion report wanting to act out what they've seen. And of course, in Scotland, we're not immune. A major Scottish study by the University of the Highlands and Islands found that 86% of boys aged 13 to 15 in West Scotland had also viewed online pornography. NHS Scotland's own research highlights that 41% of popular online pornography videos analysed depicted violence against women. And of course, the content distorts young people's understanding of sex, relationships and consent, and normalises aggression and exploitation. So it's not just a matter of curiosity, as we sometimes hear said, it's fundamentally shaping attitudes, ultimately distorting relationships and fueling abuse. And of course, the trauma inflicted by this exposure can also be profound. Boys in themselves become victims too. Experts warn that the eroticisation of violence and pornography can lead to traumatised sexuality, difficulties ultimately in forming healthy relationships, and in some cases a cycle of aggression or alternatively disassociation. And I put this on the record right up front. This is a public health problem that we cannot afford to ignore, and I welcome the efforts to work with the UK Government to address this important reserved area. But if we are to end violence against women and girls, we must also address the role of men, not as bystanders, but active allies and agents of change. We know that engaging men and boys is crucial to shifting the societal norms that underpin gender-based violence. Men have a clear role in challenging toxic masculinity, rejecting harmful stereotypes, and modelling healthy relationships. And of course, this means, and we've seen this in the very successful Police Scotland campaign, speaking out. Don't be that guy. Men have to recognise ending violence against women is not a burden for women to shoulder alone. It's a collective responsibility, and men have to be at the forefront of this movement. Now, I hope the promotion of the White Ribbon campaign by Ben McPherson will be continued. We need somebody to pick that up now that he's in the Minister's position. Excellent. I can see somebody's pointing behind me. But all men here, to remind you, the White Ribbon symbolises a pledge to never commit, condone or remain silent about violence against women and girls. And to pick up a point that Maggie Chapman made earlier, all you men here, particularly in that role in this profession, not to remain silent and speak out regardless of whether you agree with a person's political party or political view. We all need to do that. Now, I would say that, frankly, our efforts are undermined when government fails to prioritise women's safety, dignity and privacy. Now, I know the Scottish Government has made public commitments, but I feel its actions have often fallen short. Sometimes that's because of complexity, and I understand how difficult these matters are. But I reiterate, and you know this is my view, everybody in here, that the Supreme Court decision that makes clear for the purposes of the Equality Act, sex means biological sex. Picking up an earlier point, the decision to shelve legislation on misogyny disappointed many. We've heard that reiterated today. But at least there's now action to add sex as a protected characteristic. It was ridiculous that women were the only group making up 51% of our Scottish population not covered. I don't underestimate the systemic nature of the challenge, and in some respects we're still at the early stages. We do still not routinely disaggregate data across all policy making by sex, and of course other data collectors, to help us glean critical insights, particularly around economic measures, and this is something I consistently reiterate. If we're truly committed to ending violence against women and girls, we have to address the root causes, including the commodification of women's bodies. The prostitution bill being brought forward by Ash Regan is a critical step forward. By criminalising the purchase of sex, the bill targets demand, not those exploited by the sex trade. Now, I know the Government has some concerns about amendments needed to this bill, but I hope they can support it at least through stage 1 to make a statement about principle we in the SNP agree with. It sends a clear message. Women are not commodities to be bought and sold, and until we challenge and dismantle the systems that treat women as objects for consumption, violence will persist. So let us unite, not just in words but in action, to build a society where every woman and girl is safe, respected and free to live with dignity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Thompson. I call Pam Gozal to be followed by Marie McNair. Ms Gozal.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Every year since entering Parliament in 2021, I have been speaking in debates on sex-based violence and on 16 days of activism. And sadly, things are not any better today. In fact, they are getting worse. This year's 16 days of activism theme is Unite to End Digital Violence Against All Women and Girls. With technology playing a more prominent role in our lives, digital hate is constantly on the rise. What can start off as a seemingly harmless message, comment or post can spiral into something dangerous. From misogynistic comments to private photos being shared without consent to deep fakes which include women and girls' faces on naked bodies, the internet is becoming an increasingly dangerous place for women and girls. And as if that was not shocking enough, we keep seeing younger and younger girls being victims of this terrible violence. Presiding Officer, sex-based violence is not just a global phenomenon. It affects women here in Scotland as well. Domestic abuse figures released by the Scottish Government remain appalling, with almost 64,000 incidents reported to Police Scotland in 1 year, amounting to one incident every 10 minutes. We clearly need to do better. At the same time, cases of sexual assault, rape and attempted rape have also risen in the past year. And, Presiding Officer, that is just a tip of the iceberg, as the majority of cases go unreported. On Thursday, I sponsored a video along with Women's Rights Network Scotland to commemorate the 46 women who have been killed by men in Scotland in the last 5 years. Presiding Officer, they were somebody's daughter, sister, mother, friend, but most importantly, somebody whose life has been lost and whose family has been shattered. Last week, the First Minister indicated in his response to my question when I asked him on the subject that he had attended similar events in his constituency. However, I was disappointed that not one single MSP attended the vigil outside Parliament. Presiding Officer, every time this year the SNP Scottish Government have this debate and claim to be champions of women's rights. However, shockingly, they can't even define the word women. Their policies put women at risk, including putting dangerous men into women's prisons. At the same time,
I have a point of order. Please resume your seat, Ms Gozo. Point of order, Christine Graham.
I seek your guidance, Deputy Presiding Officer. The member said not one member of the SNP attended. I did give my apologies to the member and she accepted them and conveyed her thanks. I just thought I should correct that.
Thank you, Ms Graham. That is not a point of order. Please continue, Ms Gozo.
At the same time, they refuse to call for a grooming gangs inquiry, all in the name of political correctness, and choose to bury their heads in the sand as if grooming gangs aren't a problem. This is a problem that is not going away, but the SNP keep kicking the can down the road. That is why I am proud that the Scottish Conservatives will keep bringing this issue up until justice is served. Given that this debate is titled All Together, Uniting Local and National Efforts Across Sectors to End Violence Against Women and Girls, I would like to take some time to speak about an event which I attended in my area of East Dunbartonshire. Last Monday, East Dunbartonshire Women's Aid hosted an event titled Empowering Deaf Women to Report Domestic Abuse. Deaf women and girls who have been domestically abused must overcome extra hurdles not necessarily experienced by women and girls that can hear. We heard first-hand that the Police Scotland and Women's Aid organisations, with latter ones already being shortened on resources, do not always have BSL interpreters or staff with the knowledge of BSL. At the same time, many interpreters do not feel comfortable taking up domestic abuse cases. It was also shocking to hear that many deaf women were not aware of the words such as consent, cohesion. As the police do not gather data on disability, and when it comes to domestic abuse cases, it is difficult to identify the extent of the problem. These women are already let down by current systems and are being further let down at the most vulnerable stage. The Scottish Government like to brag on about their Equally Safe strategy. While this strategy is more than welcome, but the picture on the ground is different, as more needs to be done. That is where my Prevention of Domestic Abuse Scotland Bill comes into play. The bill introduces a domestic abuse register which operates in a manner similar to the Sex Offenders Register, by helping authorities better monitor those convicted of crimes of domestic abuse. At the same time, the bill places a mandatory assessment of whether or not someone is capable of receiving rehabilitation, while also mandating domestic abuse education at schools. Finally, my bill improves data collection so that the Scottish Government and authorities have a clearer picture of which communities are affected more than others, such as, for example, disabled or BAME communities. My bill has been backed by third sector and by survivors of domestic abuse. Tomorrow, the Criminal Justice Committee will be taking evidence on it, and I hope that it is supported by MSPs from all parties at Stage 1 and Stage 3. In closing, Presiding Officer, I hope this chamber can come together for once and agree that the current model is simply not good enough. Things won't change overnight, but as parliamentarians, it is our duty to ensure that no more lives are lost due to sex-based violence.
Thank you, Ms Gozo. I now call Marie McNair to be followed by Roger Grant. Ms McNair.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am grateful to speak in this important debate during the 16 days of action to end gender-based violence. It is up to us all to work together to prevent and end violence against women and girls, and we must also address the underlying attitudes and systems that perpetuate it. To do this, Presiding Officer, we must unite our efforts across local, national and third sector plans to fully tackle violence against women and girls. West Dunbartonshire, part of my constituency, continues to have the second highest rate of domestic abuse in Scotland, and a key source of support throughout my constituency for many decades has been Clydebank Women's Aid. In previous speeches I have mentioned their superb work, but unfortunately earlier this year they announced their closure. I worked closely with them for over 20 years, so I know how tirelessly they have worked and how much of an impact they have made to the lives of those most in need. Women, children and young people deserve to live a life free of fear and violence, and Clydebank Women's Aid have been a crucial source of support for those experiencing domestic abuse. Their closure has been a real blow to our town, and I am extremely disappointed that this decision was made, and they have not been better supported with secure funding from the Labour-run Western Berkshire Council. This has left Clydebank vulnerable without a vital service, which is why I am speaking today to push for more for my town to ensure it is not left behind in these cross-party and cross-governmental efforts to end violence against women and girls. Clydebank is a clear example of why it is vital that we unite local and national efforts in tackling this, and that is why I am glad this year to be supporting the Reclaim the Night March in Clydebank, organised by Clydebank Women Supporting Women and the youth charity Why Sort It. This allows us to stand together in solidarity and raise awareness and challenge violence against women and girls in Clydebank and beyond. My sincere thanks to Clydebank Women Supporting Women and Why Sort It for organising this important event. Presiding Officer, I welcome that the Scottish Government has taken a number of steps to legislate for action on domestic abuse, including the Domestic Abuse Scotland Act 2018, which creates a specific offence of domestic abuse that incorporates coercive and controlling behaviour. And that through the Equally Safe Fund, this year it will provide £21.6 million to 115 projects that focus on preventing and eradicating violence against women and girls. Gender-based violence is a harsh reality experienced by our mothers, sisters, daughters and friends, and it knows no bounds and significantly impacts the individual and even the wider society. The theme this year, led by UN Women, is Unite to End Digital Violence Against All Women and Girls. And this year's theme reminds us that violence is not just physical, it follows survivors into digital spaces. It highlights the growing threat of online harassment, image-based abuse and digital coercive control. Digital spaces should be safe for everyone, but unfortunately are not, and I know many of my female colleagues have faced online abuse in their role as MSPs, and this is simply not acceptable. Digital violence is the fastest growing form of abuse against women and children worldwide. And with the development of digital technologies such as artificial intelligence, this poses new risks for women and girls, such as the development of deep fakes. Action is required across all policy areas, with government and tech companies all working together to respond to the added risks this may pose to women. Therefore, I welcome that the Scottish Government gives this issue absolute priority and is working to deliver the Equally Safe strategy for preventing and eradicating violence against women and girls. I am pleased that they have established an internal policy group on technology-facilitated violence against women and girls in recognition of the cross-cutting nature of this issue. This work will look to accelerate the Scottish Government's strategic approach to tackling the issue, including how it further strengthens its approach to addressing online misogyny. We, of course, know that we will only see real change when those who perpetrate domestic abuse, the majority of whom are men, change their behaviours and actions. We need to educate boys from an early age about respect for women, consent and empathy for others. It is an invaluable tool to tackling this abhorrent issue and changing societal behaviour. Presiding Officer, imagining a Scotland without gender-based violence should not be difficult. It is achievable, and I am pleased to see what work has been currently done on this by the Scottish Government, but it is vital that we continue the momentum and unite to ensure that women and girls can live a life free from fear and violence. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms McNair. I now call Rhoda Grant to be followed by Sir McMillan. Ms Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As we mark the 16 days of activism, we've got a chance to reflect on the ongoing impact of violence against women on our society. The sad truth is that 60% of women murdered are murdered by someone who was supposed to love them. And this statistic is shocking. It seems to change little regardless of the action we've taken. We live in a society where misogynism is prevalent and those perpetrating it are being emboldened. As is the case with most hate crimes, hiding behind anonymous social media accounts and empowered by the manosphere influencers. Others have highlighted online pornography and how it teaches our young people about sexual relationships. And this not only influences boys in the way that they treat women, it also influences girls on what they should expect from relationships. It promotes violence against women at a very early age, and this needs to change. We have an opportunity during these 16 days of activism to do something positive. This year, the Prostitution Offences and Support Scotland Bill has come to the Parliament. This bill seeks to decriminalise those in prostitution, criminalise sex buyers and provides routes out for those who are being exploited. The Scottish Government has accepted that over 2 decades that prostitution is violence against women, yet we still criminalise women and do nothing about those who create the demand. Let us not shy away from the truth. This is a multi-billion-pound industry worldwide, and those that are making their living from exploiting others will not easily give up their lucrative trade. We've seen the level of opposition against this bill, often spurious. The whole trade is founded on misogyny. That a woman can be sold as a commodity to buy, the buyer feels free to choose how to use them in the way that they see fit, but not as a human being, to be treated with respect. And the truth is, you cannot buy consent. So basically, we're turning our back on rape on an industrial scale. Women in prostitution live in danger. It's not a normal job. None of us would want our daughter, sister or mother to be exploited in prostitution. If this is wrong for our own, then surely it is wrong for everybody else. The damage it causes both mentally and physically is horrific. In this Parliament, there is no excuse to be unaware of this. Survivors have come and given us their testimony, yet for most part MSPs have not heard them. And of course it's upsetting, it's frightening to hear their experiences, and once you've heard it you can't unhear it. But it's not an excuse to do nothing. It's desperately sad that the Scottish Government, who recognises that this is violence against women, cannot give their wholehearted support to this bill. Every bill that comes through the Parliament is amended in one way or another. Many of the issues dealt with in the bill should already be in place. This should not need legislation. We should already have well-funded exit routes for those in prostitution if we really believe that this is violence against women. And we should not be convicting women of soliciting offences if we really believe that this is violence against women. We should be allocating the blame for this abuse where it sits, and that is squarely with the sex buyer. The cross-party group on commercial sexual exploitation carried out research into online pimping, and there are many platforms that advertise this work, from Viva Street to OnlyFans. Women are sold in Scotland today on an industrial scale. These sites try to suggest they take steps to ensure that their sites are not used by traffickers and exploiters, but a quick look will tell you otherwise. Identical photographs, the same email address, the same phone number are used for multiple women. Women are trafficked into Scotland and around Scotland to feed that demand, and this is violence. France, Sweden and Ireland and many others have taken steps. They've implemented the policies included in Ash Regan's bill, and they've cut violence against women, and they've also furthered the cause of equality. It's clear that countries that tackle prostitution also find that their society becomes more equal, pay is more equal, caring responsibilities are shared. We should not be surprised at that, because if one sex is commodified, it surely leads to the impression that they are less worthy than the other, that can use them as commodities. Because of this, prostitution impacts the whole of society, not just those exploited. Prostitution leads to women being treated as commodities. Presiding Officer, if we really want to change, we have the opportunity to do so. So let's grasp it and let us back the unbuyable bill.
Thank you, Ms Grant. I now call Stuart McMillan to be followed by Sharon Dow. Mr McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. At the outset of my contribution, I want to be clear that men need to do better. There is no excuse for violence against women and girls, and as the statistics show, the main perpetrators are men. In the past, some considered it to be normal to be violent against women and girls, and some would consider the so-called good old days when aspects of life were allegedly better than today. Now, those so-called good old days will have seen more deprivation, more children being failed at school because of an undiagnosed additional support need, and more women being denied opportunities because their place was at home. There are many other examples I'm sure colleagues from across the chamber could also name. Sadly, however, too many men associate gender-based violence with masculinity and being macho. There is absolutely nothing macho about being a bully. Going back to the motion before us today, it mentions national and local efforts. And whilst we can all agree that this is a global issue, it's important to consider how actions at different levels can affect positive change. At the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association conferences, there's consistently been a workshop dedicated to this particular issue, and some of the testimonies heard by delegates have been horrendous and sobering. Different countries have different cultures and considerations about women and girls. However, how these are dealt with vary, including how they are policed. At the recent conference in October, an MP from South Africa highlighted that in the rural border areas between South Africa and Mozambique and Swaziland, domestic abuse is sadly commonplace. It's not always reported to the police, and on many occasions the perpetrator will go back home before being caught and dealt with. So I therefore want to reflect on Tess White's amendment, which states that reported crimes against women and girls in Scotland are rising. It's always a concern to see crimes rising, but in this instance, I believe that this shows that more women and girls feel empowered to come forward to report these attacks. On one hand, this demonstrates why we need to keep challenging gender-based violence, but if more perpetrators are caught and dealt with, then this is also positive. Now, turning to the Ash Regan's amendment, which obviously isn't up for voting later, I don't disagree at all with the sentiment of Ash Regan's bill, but it is going through the parliamentary process, and I do await the report from the Criminal Justice Committee on the Stage 1 considerations. And I thought the recent correspondence from the Swedish Police was actually very useful for what she's actually trying to achieve. Now, Maggie Chapman's amendment, also which isn't up for voting later, highlights the problems with, and I quote, toxic masculinity and the need to take concerted action on misogynistic behaviour online, and calling for plans to, and I quote, tackle online violence are developed as part of the next refresh for Equally Safe. I wholeheartedly agree with Maggie Chapman on these points, but, Presiding Officer, social media is pervasive, and it's been used to spread toxic masculine ideals en masse by bad actors who use these platforms to influence young and impressionable boys or adult males who, quite frankly, should know better. Now, members will know that I keep my private life very private and I very rarely mention my family in Parliament. But for the sake of today's debate, I want to reflect on being a father of 2 daughters. Now, my wife and I have raised them to stand up for themselves, take no nonsense from anyone, and to be careful when they go out, and if they see any signs of trouble, just get away. But I'm sure that every parent in the chamber has probably done the same. I want my daughters to love life and savour every moment because it really is precious. Now, keeping themselves safe is an essential part of that, particularly online. However, I'm also conscious that the messages that we tell our kids shouldn't be gendered. If we only teach girls how to keep themselves safe, but don't teach boys the same, choosing to brush off violent misogynistic behaviour as boys being boys, then we face a losing battle, and we're doing women and girls a huge disservice. Now, fundamentally, there is no easy answer and there is no quick fix, because if there was, it would have been done by now. However, educating children about how to be kind to one another, to be respectful and to look out for each other regardless of the differences, it goes a long way to actually helping improve society. Now, many people will respond to that by saying that this already happens, but it's not just about teaching this to our kids when they're young. It's also about making sure that we as adults reflect the message in our behaviour, and that we repeat this message as they grow older. Now, toxic masculinity harms boys and men, as well as women and girls. Education and helping young boys and men away from it is absolutely essential. So the education point in this wider debate is really crucial in this. Now, in closing, I actually want to implore to every man in the chamber and every male who is watching this or reads the official report at some point in the future to actually challenge these attitudes that this chamber has been discussing this afternoon. Challenge the attitudes and the behaviours when we hear or see them not just during the 16 days of activism, but for every single day of the year. Failure to do so will only make us complicit. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr McMullen. I now call Sharon Dowie to be followed by Claire Baker in 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm glad the Scottish Government has brought a debate to this chamber on the importance of tackling violence against women and girls. Like females across Scotland, I hope the fact they've done so signals a new approach from the SNP when it comes to protecting the rights of women and girls. Because up to this point, there has been precious little evidence that the issue is anywhere near the top of the agenda. In fact, the Scottish Government's attitude to the protection of women and girls is not fairly represented in the text of this motion at all. A clearer picture can be seen in the refusal to launch an inquiry into grooming gangs in Scotland, or the ongoing disgraceful situation relating to males being housed in women's prisons, or even the shocking lack of action surrounding everything from domestic abuse to the shocking year-on-year increases in rape and sexual assaults. If SNP ministers were genuinely serious about ending violence towards women and girls in Scotland, they would do more than just offer warm words in this parliamentary chamber. And yet, Presiding Officer, those victims in Scotland of child grooming gangs cannot even enjoy warm words from this Scottish Government. From the First Minister down, senior ministers have repeatedly refused this much-needed investigation. Victims in other parts of the UK are finally getting the chance of justice and for answers, and yet in Scotland, yet again, things just have to be different. On this side of the chamber, we have tried for quite some time to persuade the Scottish Government to change its mind, but attempt after attempt has been thwarted. In fact, when the Scottish Conservatives recently tried to put in a Freedom of Information request to find out more about the mysterious National Child Sexual Abuse and Exploitation Strategic Group, we were met with a bizarre rejection. In obstructing information from being published, the response used policy language about marine planning as justification for this secrecy. So marine planning on the matter of grooming gangs, clearly a mistake in Scottish Government HQ, but that sloppiness and negligence sums up rather well the SNP's attitude to this matter. And what's more, further research by my colleague Liam Kerr found a complete absence of interest in this strategic group. Remember, this is a group that's been established, which the Scottish Government claims negates the need for an inquiry. So you would think attending its meetings would be rather important for senior government ministers. And yet the Cabinet Secretary for Justice has never been. The Minister for Victims and Community Safety hasn't turned up either, and even the Minister for Children has yet to grace the meetings with her presence. Victims and wider members of the public will find it incredible that, on the one hand, the SNP cites this group as evidence of its tough response to child exploitation, yet on the other hand, no senior ministers have seen fit to even show up to the meetings. The continued refusal of this government to hold a grooming gangs inquiry is a national disgrace. There is evidence of grooming in every part of Scotland, and yet every part of the government would rather close its eyes and pretend it hadn't happened. It's a blinkered and shameful approach, and it must change now. Presiding Officer, we often hear ministers lament the number of women who are currently incarcerated in Scotland's prisons. They are rightly described as among the most vulnerable females in society. And we know that, far from being feared and notorious criminals, many of them are victims of crime and abuse themselves. Despite all that, the SNP are refusing to change their policy of allowing dangerous male criminals who happen to just think or say they are females to be housed in women's prisons. We know that these men do this because they are arrogant and abusive, because they want to pose a threat to women, and because they think they will have an easier life than they would in a male prison. They are taking the system for a ride. The Supreme Court's ruling on sex was abundantly clear, and it's a disgrace that the Scottish Government hasn't heeded it. There should be no men in women's prisons. It really is as simple as that. Presiding Officer, women and girls across Scotland are frightened for their safety. Domestic abuse is on a constant increasing trajectory, and we know it's females who bear the brunt of this. They are also usually the victims when it comes to rape, another crime which is on an alarmingly rising trend. In the term of this Parliament alone, 39 women have lost their lives in Scotland to male violence. There are so many things our government could be embarking upon to help turn the tide in this. They could back my colleague and friend Pam Gosell's domestic abuse bill, which would create a domestic abuse register. They could get serious about misogyny laws, and they could properly resource a justice system which gets tough on perpetrators, punishes and then rehabilitates properly, and serves up a robust deterrent to would-be or repeat criminals. Presiding Officer, only then will the women and girls of Scotland really believe this government is on their side. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Dowie. I now call Claire Baker to be followed by Ash Regan. Around 6 minutes. Ms Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I do welcome the opportunity to contribute to this important debate this afternoon. The 16 Days of Activism campaign remains a stark reminder of the violence and abuse that far too many women and girls continue to face. Each year, as we mark this period in Parliament, we must do more than acknowledge that this is unacceptable. We must ask whether we are truly doing enough to change the realities of women's lives and to ensure they are better protected from violence and abuse in all its forms. This year's focus on digital violence, now the fastest growing form of abuse worldwide, is both timely and necessary. Digital spaces are increasingly central to young people's lives, to women's work and to our social interactions, yet they remain hostile environments for far too many. But while digital violence is our specific focus today, it sits within the wider continuum of gender-based violence that pervades homes, communities, workplaces and public spaces. Globally, the scale is devastating. Around 1 in 3 women will experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. More than a quarter of women aged 15 to 49 who have been in a relationship report they have been subjected to physical or sexual violence by a partner. As many as 38% of all murders of women are committed by intimate partners. Humanitarian crisis, displacement and emergencies heighten these risks, and as we saw during the COVID lockdown, existing inequalities can quickly escalate into new forms of harm. Here in Scotland, sexual violence and domestic abuse have persistently increased. We are also witnessing a rise in misogynist abuse in transport, healthcare and education settings, and of course online. Yet, despite the commitments made, the Scottish Government has not prioritised the rollout of Equally Safe, nor backed it with the long-term resources that are required. The decision to drop the planned misogyny bill was a profound disappointment. Given the First Minister's stated commitment to tackling misogynist abuse, it was a moment when actions failed to match words. If we are to protect women and girls effectively, we need legislation, proper funding and decisive leadership. There is growing evidence of what works to prevent violence against women. The Respect Women framework, with its 7 strategies and range of interventions, highlights successful interventions that prioritise women's safety, challenge unequal power, gender power relationships, are participatory and start early in life. If we are to achieve lasting change, we need to enact and enforce legislation, allocate resources into prevention and response, and implement policies that promote gender equality. As elected members, it is our responsibility to push the Scottish Government to deliver on these principles. But it is equally important that we support education and awareness within our own communities. I am grateful to the many survivors who, despite trauma and loss, continue to empower others and help create change. Tomorrow evening, I will join Fife Reclaim the Night March, which is taking place in Dunfermline this year, and the Let's Talk event afterwards, which is part of an ongoing community effort to end violence against women and girls. Across Fife schools, many pupils participate in the Mentors in Violence Prevention programme. It equips young people with the language and confidence to challenge attitudes and cultural norms that underpin gender-based violence, bullying and abuse. It encourages active bystander behaviour and empowers young women to support their peers. While I understand that all local authorities do engage with the programme, delivery is not consistent across all schools. Time pressures and competing priorities create challenges, but we must ensure that schools are supported to deliver this vital preventative work. Turning to the digital sphere, we know that online platforms have become fertile ground for misogyny, harassment, grooming and coercive control. I recognise the steps taken by the UK Government through the Online Safety Act, which, though not without implementation challenges, is a necessary and important step in delivering stronger protections for young people. Online spaces have been difficult to police precisely because safety was not built into platform design from the outset, and holding platforms accountable for the content and behaviour they host is overdue. The motion highlights the UN Women Unite to End Digital Violence Against All Women and Girls campaign, which rightly asserts that digital safety is now central to gender equality. It calls for coordinated action across governments, tech companies, institutions and individuals. That mirrors the approach we must take here, requiring transparency about harms such as cyberbullying, online abuse and harmful content, promoting digital environments resilient to disinformation and ensuring that Ofcom delivers on its role in safety by design, transparency, agile regulation and inclusivity. We should not underestimate the difference between the online world today and the environment many adults grew up in. Children and young people navigate risks that did not exist even a decade ago. Research into the impacts of smartphones and social media on well-being, particularly for girls and young women, is still emerging, and policymakers must not lag behind the technological realities that are shaping young people's lives. The rise in misogynist content across social media and mainstream online platforms has serious consequences. It normalises abusive language, harmful behaviours and even physical violence. The normalisation of non-fatal strangulation linked to depictions of choking on mainstream pornography contributes to the culture of abuse that we must challenge. Banning the depiction of strangulation and pornography is a necessary step, but we cannot stop there. Broader action is required to confront both the commercial structures and cultural norms that fuel online misogyny. I wish to close by, if there is time, Presiding Officer, by speaking about the case of Demi Hanaway, whose family I have been supporting. A fresh investigation is now underway and I'll not comment on its progress, but I want to acknowledge the recent reporting in the Sunday Post on misogyny and sexism within Police Scotland and the very real concerns that Demi's family have experienced about whether these attitudes influenced the initial investigation. Demi endured domestic abuse and, despite police call-outs, charges were only pursued due to the persistence and courage of her family under the most awful circumstances. Demi's family were among those who gathered recently outside the Parliament at the vigil for women whose lives had been taken by male violence. We owe it to them and to every woman and girl experiencing abuse to redouble our efforts to end this violence in all its forms, including online. Parliament must unite in its commitment and act decisively. Only then can we hope to build the safer, more equal society that women and girls deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. And I call Ash Regan to be followed by Paul McLennan. Around 6 minutes, Ms Regan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Digital technology has created new mediums for abuse, but let us be clear, technology is a tool, not the abuser itself. Technology simply creates new frontiers for a very old problem, male violence against women and girls. It amplifies harm, it facilitates exploitation, and it hides abuse in plain sight, but the perpetrator remains the same. But we can, and I believe we must now, join the dots between how the state protects women and girls and societal attitudes to committing crimes against them. And the numbers are stark. In 2024-25, Scotland recorded just under 15,000 sexual crimes. That's the second highest annual total since 1971. And rape and attempted rape have risen by over 60% over the past decade. And crimes associated with prostitution are up by 33% in our latest crime figures, reflecting rising exploitation and the persistent danger faced by women in the sex trade. And these are not isolated spikes. They are predictable outcomes of a society that tolerates male sexual entitlement and the exploitation of women to meet it. And to confront this, we must define the problem correctly. This is male violence against women and girls. And it takes many forms, including rape, grooming gangs, sex trafficking and prostitution, all fuelled by a single root cause, male demand. New research from the USA confirms what we already know and what COPFS acknowledged. Men who buy sex are statistically more likely to endorse hostile masculinity, sexual aggression and dehumanising attitudes towards women. They see prostituted women not as people, but as products for sale, purchase, review, to meet their wants, no matter how dehumanising, how degrading or how violent. They're more likely to commit other forms of sexual violence, and their actions directly drive the criminal marketplace for coercion, for sex trafficking and other multi-layered exploitation. The Supreme Court ruling delivered legal clarity on woman, man and sex, and now this Parliament must act on that clarity to tackle sex-based risk. Women and girls continue to be commercially sexually exploited, legally tolerated as long as it doesn't occur in public. So a Scotland that tolerates commercial exploitation by where it happens, not that it happens, is a form of state-endorsed systemic violence, and that makes Scotland a pimp state. Rising sexual crimes, grooming, trafficking and prostitution, it's all interconnected and it's all driven by male demand. And we have the evidence, we have the data and we have the legal framework to compel us, united by that common purpose, to act in devolved, in reserved, in local authority and in our international bodies. And in this Parliament, I believe we can take 3 immediate steps. So, step 1, implement the For Women Scotland Supreme Court judgment fully. Ensure that all laws and policies recognise sex-based risk. Number 2, criminalise the purchase of sex and provide robust support for those that are exploited through my unbuyable bill. And 3, take domestic violence and trafficking laws seriously, backed by robust data capture and enforcement in order to detect networked exploitation and protect potential victims and support survivors. The choice is clear. We know the problem, we know the perpetrators, and now we must act to end male violence against women and girls, whether it's online, it's offline or anywhere it takes place. And our society cannot continue to tolerate that vulnerable women and girls' bodies are bought, sold or abused. And this Parliament has the power and the responsibility to stop it, and unbuyable is, I believe, a critical first step in this. This Parliament cannot say that it is serious about combating violence against women and girls if it doesn't take this opportunity. I've been here for nearly 10 years now, and like some of the other speakers, I've watched this debate take place year after year after year. The statistics are showing that rather than things getting better for women and girls, things are actually getting worse. So we must use what we have and what we can do in order to combat it. Those that are in prostitution, the majority of them are not there by choice. They are girls that have been in our care system. They've been sexually abused as children. They've been groomed. They've been coerced, or they've been trafficked into this country. And those girls, they deserve more. And so I believe that this Parliament should act to protect them. And as Madame Pellico very bravely said, the shame must change sides.
Thank you, Ms Regan. I now call Paul McLennan, who is the final speaker in the open debate, around 6 minutes. Mr McLennan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm glad to speak in this debate. And normally this debate is consensual. I have to say I'm a little bit concerned about how this has been politicised by the Tory speakers in this. I really am. And I appreciate toxic masculinity is on the increase. There's no doubt about it. There's absolutely no doubt about it. We all see it. We all know that it's damaging our communities, our schools, our workplaces, and of course in everyday life. Now, over 4 years ago, we all stood here as a new Parliament. We stood here in the time, obviously, the 16 days of activism. We all pledged to do more. And what time we have left in this session, we all need to do so. The new Parliament next year will be doing the same, and we'll be debating this time next year as well. It must also pledge to do more. Now, the focus this year, obviously, is on online safety, and I'll touch on that in a little bit later on. And a few speakers have talked about the number of incidents of domestic abuse in 23-24. It was 63,867. 63,867. That's a scary figure. A clear majority of victims, obviously, were female, and the vast majority of perpetrators are male. Since 2018-19, Police Scotland has recorded 60,000 incidents of domestic abuse every year. That's 1,150 per week, 164 a day, 7 every hour. Now, in the time we've been speaking in this debate, that's 20 women, in the time we've been speaking in this debate, will have suffered domestic abuse. That's not acceptable. We all know domestic abuse is largely a hidden crime which goes unreported to the police. Scottish Women's Aid believe that this figure is to be much higher as not all incidents are reported to the police, which this report acknowledges. Yeah, if you can be brief. Yep.
Tess White.
Thank you. Thank you for taking that point of order. Is it Thank you. Point of order. Thank you. Thank you.
Is this an intervention or is it a point of order?
Sorry, it's an intervention.
Intervention, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Is it a opposition's right and duty to hold the government to account and to point out failures, to actually say what the MSP has just said, to politicise, is actually aggressive in itself?
Paul McLennan, I can give you the time back.
No, thank you, President Officer. No, I don't agree with that. And obviously there's political debate in every debate that we have. But this debate over the 4 years that I've been in here is normally consensual, and it's been politicised too much for me. So I want to move back into the key points I want to mention. Almost half of domestic abuse incidents reported by police in Scotland were between current partners in 23-24. And let's not forget that. Almost half were between ex-partners. And I think some of the nuanced details as well are really important. Females between 31 and 35 had the highest rate per 10,000 for population of victims. And again, males 31 to 35, again, were the largest age for the perpetrators. So again, I think there's lessons to be learned in terms of that. 65% were involved had previously been recorded, so there's repeat abuse kind of going on. And I think we touched about the issues around about housing and other key agencies in terms of that. 9 out of 10 incidents occur in a home. And I think it's been talked about before, 47% of female homicide victims were most likely to be killed by an ex-partner. Now, like everybody else, I got a briefing from this from Engender, and some of the key figures that they talked about was 2,897 crimes of rape and attempted rape. That's an increase of 15%, 23-24. The number of sexual crimes recorded by the police is at its second highest level since 1971. And between 2017 and 2021, Police Scotland recorded 701 honour-based abuse-related concerns. That's an average of 140 per annum in terms of that. Now, some of the key... we come into Parliament as men, and I've heard men talk about this debate before, and we just take it for granted about living our life. 3/4 of women in the UK have experienced some form of harassment in the public space. 3/4. That's my daughter. That's my wife, that's my niece. That's scary. It's incredible. As men, we take it for granted, and we can't allow that to happen. We just can't. More than 1 in 6 women have experienced online violence, while over a third have witnessed it. And research by Zero Tolerance shows that misogynistic extremism is spreading amongst young people online. We've heard various examples of that today. But let's get down to what this really is all about, and it is about gender inequality. It's about gender inequality that we all take for granted. Women still have less access to power. In 2023, women only held a third positions in power in Scotland, across the public sector, political institutions, media, despite accounting for 51% of the population. That's wrong. Money and resources. Women experience higher rates of poverty, relying more on social security and are less likely to own their own home. That's wrong. And a third of secondary school boys believe that girls wearing revealing clothing are asking for trouble, while 1 in 6 do not view girls as equals. That's wrong. That's the real cause of this. It's the real cause of this is about gender inequality. Now, in gender, when in their briefing again mentioned about the collection of data, and I think that's really important. Sex disaggregated data on violence against women. I think that's really important. And they also talked about a large-scale survey of women across Scotland on violence against women and girls, and consider asking relevant questions to the Health Survey and Scottish Household Survey. So I'd be glad if the Minister or Cabinet Secretary would pick up on that particular point in their summing up. I think there's a Presiding Officer in conclusion. Violence against women continues to occur at endemic levels in Scotland. This is preventable. We must address the root cause, which is gender inequality, and integrate primary prevention in all areas of primary policy. Now, I know how passionate the Minister and Cabinet Secretary are about this and about the Scottish Government's Equally Safe strategy. The strategy is obviously backed by funding, £20 million, and it works obviously in collaboration with COSLA. The Equally Safe Fund is delivering money each year to support one-to-one projects. And when I was a Minister, I remember speaking to the Minister around about this, and I know I was aware of her passion on this particular issue. As part of the Housing Emergency Action Plan, the Scottish Government is investing £1 million into the National Fund to Leave, and that, again, in discussions I had with Women's Aid at that time, is incredibly important. We all have a role to play in this, men especially. We all need to do more. Thanks, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr McLennan. We come to the closing speeches. I call first Maggie Chapman, around 6 minutes. Ms Chapman.
Thank you. I'd like to begin my closing speech, as others have already done this afternoon, by recognising the phenomenal work of all those organisations and individuals who work every day to prevent violence against women and girls, to support survivors, to raise awareness, to embed trauma-informed responses to those seeking assistance, and so much more. I am sincerely grateful to all of them. And I remember Christina McKelvey, who fought so fiercely for gender equality in this place and beyond. I want to speak candidly. This Parliament must reckon with its own complicity in the climate that allows violence against women and girls to continue. Not because we all intend harm, but because silence, half measures and political games have consequences. We know the root cause of violence is gender inequality, not bad decisions by individuals, not misunderstandings, not culture clashes. Gender inequality, shaped by patriarchy, reinforced by toxic masculinity and exploited by everyday extremists, drives violence in every part of our society. And we don't need to look far for powerful testimonies. I quote, "Every time politicians argue about women's safety while cutting the services that actually keep us alive, I feel like we're being used as props. When MSPs share posts about me voting for trans rights, the threats start again. It feels coordinated. As a trans woman, I'm told every day that people like me are the danger, but I'm the one who can't walk home safely. I'm the one who gets spat at. I'm the one who gets followed. What I needed was support. What I got was a waiting list. Men online know nothing will happen to them. They've learned the world will protect them, not me. These testimonies should terrify us because they show that misogyny is not only growing, it is being legitimised. The far right has weaponised women's safety with chilling effectiveness. They blame migrants for violence while statistics show the opposite. They claim to defend children while spreading conspiracy theories that isolate and endanger them. They platform men who promote coercive control as traditional masculinity. And worst of all, their narratives seep into mainstream discourse. When this Parliament fails to challenge these lies, when we allow myths about women's equality having gone too far, or fear-mongering about trans people, or the demonisation of sex workers, we embolden those who would roll back decades of feminist progress. We must stop that slide. Us women don't need protection, we need liberation. So what does liberation look like, and what can the men in this place do to support it? Liberation for women in Scotland would mean a society where every woman and every gender-diverse person can move through the world without fear, where our homes, our streets, our workplaces, our online spaces and our political institutions are not shaped by the threat of male violence. It would mean economic independence, secure incomes, accessible housing, universal services, social security that empowers rather than traps. It would mean care work is valued, migrant women are protected, disabled women are centred, trans women are safe, sex workers' rights are safe and safety are respected. Liberation looks like power shared. Parliaments, councils, boardrooms, newsrooms that reflect the people they serve. And crucially, liberation requires men to do the work, to unlearn patriarchal entitlement, to challenge misogyny in their friendships and workplaces, to refuse the comfort of silence, and to actively participate in building communities rooted in equality, care, accountability and justice. Women's liberation is not an aspiration, it is a transformation, and men must take responsibility for their part in making it real. When politicians post or share posts of voting records in ways that deliberately single out women MSPs, they are not informing the public, as some in opposite benches might think. They are feeding a misogynistic ecosystem that already places women under constant threat. When colleagues indulge in dog whistle rhetoric that casts trans women as dangers or migrants as threats to our women and children, they are participating in the very structures that produce violence. We must decide who we stand with, survivors or those who profit from their suffering. We also need a radical shift in policy making. We are falling short of our Istanbul Convention obligations. We lack comprehensive sex disaggregated data. Primary prevention work is siloed and underfunded. Local practitioners want to do more, but are constrained by structural barriers. And UK policies, including universal credit and no recourse to public funds, these force women into dependency, poverty and homelessness, all of which are fertile grounds for abuse. So I ask the Scottish Government to commit today to a national campaign on the root causes of violence against women and girls, challenging patriarchy and harmful gender norms. Also, a Women's Equality Fund to support women with no recourse to public funds and other marginalised groups. And a radical refresh of Equally Safe, with specific targeted actions to address online violence. Survivors have told us what they need. One said, "I don't want your sympathy. I want you to stop the next man from doing what he did to me." Another says, "I don't want to be brave anymore. I want the world to stop making me have to be." If we mean any of the fine words spoken today, then we must honour them with action. Fierce, unapologetic feminist action. Action that dismantles rather than politely nudges the systems that harm women and gender-diverse people. Action that liberates. Ending violence is not about managing risk. It is about transforming society. It is liberation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. And I now call Karen Mochan again around 6 minutes. Ms Mochan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am pleased to have the opportunity to close this debate for Labour. And can I thank the Government for bringing this motion to the Chamber? It's very welcome at this time. And can I thank members for speaking on such an important issue? While the theme of this year's activism is to unite to end digital violence against all women and girls, we have heard today recent statistics remind us that violence against women and girls remains far too common right across society. Many members mentioned this evening. Whether it's domestic violence, sexual harassment or indeed rampant misogyny, women continue to be the target of far too many men's terrible behaviour and aggression. And as we have heard here today, this is in many ways magnified in the digital world. I thought the Cabinet Secretary's point about the way in which boys see very warped behaviour online can have an effect on them for life. And also Katie Clark mentioned that that digital world is really being taken over. I think other members also mentioned that by the far right, and they are pushing messages to our young men. And we have a responsibility here to do all that we can to combat that. Digital abuse, trolling, stalking and other forms of technologically facilitated violence against women and girls, I have to be clear and say it really worries me to think about this, because if I am honest, I don't think we fully understand all the aspects, and this debate has raised the challenges we have. We have heard it changes so rapidly and seems always one step ahead of us as legislators. And if we cannot understand how serious that is today and address the complexities of regulation of our digital world, but also at the same time address violence against women at that root cause, as many members have said, then we really need to think about what we are doing here in this place. We have heard how difficult the legislation in this area is and how we will need to work across all spheres of government, with companies, with communities, with individuals. And I think the message today is we must do this. We know this is challenging, but we must commit to joining together, to unite, as the motion says, because this is too important to miss, this opportunity to change the trajectory. I am, of course, pleased to hear that the Government, the Scottish Government, are working with the UK Government on the Online Safety Act, and I hope that they will continue to do that. It's a big step forward if we can actually work together as governments in Scotland, UK, Europe, because I think that is the only way that we are actually going to tackle this. A big step towards changing the trajectory is exposing the parts of our society that apologise for normalising this violence. Many of them are key parts of our establishment, and we know that within the digital world. They seem to think that gender-based violence is normal, but we know it is not inherent, and the truth is it is learned and nurtured through stereotypes, misogyny, bias and ingrained inequalities. And can I thank Stuart McMillan for his contribution where he talked about his daughters and the fact that we also need to talk to our sons, brothers, husbands, men. And Paul McLennan has spoken in this debate before, and I know he's very passionate about this. My colleague Rhoda Gran and also Ash Regan mentioned the work on online pimping. These websites just exploit vulnerable women. They are so easy to find, and the legislation has just not kept up with this sexual exploitation of women. And the words that were used in their contributions were, women are trafficked, women are seen as products. So I think there is definitely something that we need to ask the government to bring the chamber together to discuss what we do about that. I also wanted to raise the issue of porn and the normalisation of porn in the lives of young men. Of course, this happens both offline and online, but I think from research and work with young men, the exposure to porn and extreme forms of porn are accessed in that digital world. Over the 5 years that I have been in the Parliament, I've heard from women researching this area, and it is one which is often not tackled as it's perhaps uncomfortable, and it feels sometimes that we can't change it, but we must endeavour to do that. Porn is not acceptable, it is not normal, and we should be saying this to young men. Young men need to know and need to be educated, and of course in the context of today's debate, online porn has to be tackled. I've heard from young women that say it can be used to degrade them and make them feel violated, and as Michelle Thompson clearly pinpointed and stated, it really distorts some of our sexual relationships throughout our life if we are exposed to these things at an early age. And the manipulation, other members mentioned the manipulation of some of that porn online, some of the online content, and it is the truth that women really bear the brunt of that online manipulation in the digital world. So society has a responsibility to challenge this and to challenge industry and behaviours, and as parliamentarians we must ensure that we provide adequate resources to tackle this injustice. I want to just mention the Equally Safe model, which of course is very welcome, but I think it would be fair to ask the Cabinet Secretary to respond to just how we might be able to develop that further and make it work. Many members mentioned that that it's not currently working and that not all the schools have picked up on it. So I think cross-parliament, portfolio, if we could do some work in that, it would be really welcomed. So, to close, Presiding Officer, there is much to be done, but I hope that by coming together today that we can unite in this Parliament and can change the trajectory of violence against women in Scotland and across the world. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Mochan. And I call Douglas Ross around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I want to use my summing up today to pick up on points on every single speaker, because I actually think this has been an excellent debate. And the first speaker I'm going to address is actually the final speaker in the open debate, Paul McLennan, because I have to say I think it has been a consensual debate. There has been slight disagreement and challenge, but actually we need that. This is an issue that is still causing too many problems here in Scotland, across the UK and around the world. And if we just turn up at this debate year after year and say the government are doing everything correct and nothing else has to change, the problem will not get better. So the reason I think we need debate, the reason I think we need challenge, both from the opposition and, as I'll come on to when I speak about other contributions from government benches, is because there are still too many women and girls being assaulted, abused and killed in our country. And I'll give way to Paul McLennan.
Paul McLennan.
And I don't disagree with that. I think in terms of this debate, it's what we can actually do to try and move things forward. And we've talked about that, and I appreciate some of the points that were raised. But there is that balance that has to be in this debate, I think, as we take that forward. I just think, and I mentioned before, that I think it was politicised far too much in this kind of debate. And that was the point I was trying to make. Some of the points that were raised, I agree with. Others, I didn't. But some of the issues, I think the balance was wrong in terms of that debate, and that's the point I raised at that particular time. I don't disagree in terms of the point and government being held to account. Of course I do.
Douglas Ross, I can give you the time back.
I just disagree with Paul McLennan, because I didn't hear anything from Tess White, Sharon Dowie or Pam Gossel that the government haven't heard before, that doesn't need to be said in a debate like this. And I'm going to make this final point. This is now the 5th such debate of this session. When we came in here in 2021, this was an area that we all wanted to see tackled and addressed. And while we've been here debating legislation, scrutinising the government, asking questions, 39 women in Scotland have died due to violence by men. 39 lives lost. Daughters, sisters, nieces, friends lost. So if we keep coming here year after year and say the government are doing everything right, but almost 39 of our fellow Scots have died over that time, I don't think we can say the government are doing everything right. There is more we have to do to prevent these deaths. And until we can come to this debate and say not a single woman has died as a result of male violence, then that challenge will not have been met. And I think that's why it is important that we have this debate. I want to start with the Cabinet Secretary, who rightly focused a lot of her remarks on the digital sphere because of the theme this year of no excuse for online abuse. But I was also glad that she referenced the positive aspect of the digital community. Representing the Highlands and Islands, I know how important it is for some of our more remote and rural constituents that they have access to the same materials and support as people in the more urban communities. And I think her point about how obvious it can sometimes be picking up a leaflet rather than going online or getting that support could put people off. So it's right that they have those opportunities. Tess White mentioned the increase in the number of sexual assault cases. And that, again, I didn't want to interrupt Stuart McMillan, but that was challenged a little by Stuart McMillan, who was saying, well, that's a good thing, because it means people are comfortable reporting. I would accept that, but when the figures go back down again, the government tend to say, well, that shows things are working, because sexual crimes are reducing. So we can't have government or government members saying, on one hand, it's good when more are reported, because people are more confident to report things, but then they will say the opposite when the figures are going back down again and say things are clearly working. I think it is an area of concern. Katie Clark, I thought, was quite right. And I'm sorry, I've already taken one intervention, so I know, but I want to try and get through everyone. I think Katie Clark is the only person in this debate today to mention mental health. And we all look at the sometimes horrific physical abuse women and girls suffer, but it's then that lingering mental illness and well-being that we have to consider, and that stays with people for the rest of their lives, and we know how it affects family members as well. Maggie Chapman, in both her speeches, there was elements that I disagreed with, but the area where I felt she was most compelling was reading out some of the abuse that she has suffered from social media and being on social media. And the point that really struck me was both the impact it would have on Maggie Chapman individually, but also what that says to women and girls aspiring to be in this place. And I am worried about the culture, particularly on social media, and what it does to put off female candidates across the political spectrum. And I think that was picked up as well by Marie McNair, who mentioned that as well. Alex Cole-Hamilton said we must speak as one, and I think we will at decision time tonight. Whether we agree with the amendment from the Scottish Conservatives, I think we will speak as one voice when it comes to the motion. But it is more about words. It is more about coming to this chamber every year and speaking about these issues. We've got to see action as well. Once again, and I say this every time, I thought Michelle Thompson gave an excellent speech, and the quote that I wrote down was, "Men must be active allies and agents for change." And I think every man, I hope, in this chamber would agree with that. But that's a message we've got to get outside this chamber as well, and I thought she put that very well. Pam Gossel rightly was promoting her bill, appalling domestic abuse statistics that we've seen, and therefore I am certainly a very strong supporter of her bill, and I hope others are as well. Rhoda Grant spoke about the survivors who have come to Parliament to give their testimony on prostitution and how not enough MSPs have heard from them, and I agree. I think, and I include myself in this, but we do have strong advocates like Rhoda Grant and Ash Regan who provide a voice for these survivors, both in facilitating them coming to Parliament, but also articulating their views in this chamber. And I think that was something that was very helpful today, along with her international comparisons about what's already happening in France, Sweden and Ireland, and how they've tackled prostitution, and potentially we can do the same here. Stuart McMillan, I am going to mention him again, but I don't have time for an intervention. I just thought it was helpful that he mentioned from his CPA experience that we speak in the motion, or the government speak in the motion, about the local and national impact, but actually the CPA every year, I think he said, the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, legislation, look at the international impact as well. And I think the example he gave from South Africa is something that was very worthy of this debate. Sharon Dowie spoke about the lack of a grooming gang inquiry. I'm not going to reiterate all the points that Scottish Conservatives have made about that. I think it is now beyond doubt that this government will have to launch a grooming gang inquiry. I'm grateful that the Labour Party are facilitating a debate on that tomorrow. We're supposed to get an update by December, but we do need to see action on this as a matter of urgency. Likewise, Sharon Dowie was right to comment about the fact that this government are still housing male prisoners in the female prison estate. That has to stop. And I don't understand why this government are going to court to allow that to continue when the Supreme Court ruling was so clear. Claire Baker, again, raising a local constituency issue very well, also spoke about 38% of murders of women are by intimate partners. And that is a statistic we all know, but it terrifies me and I think every other MSP and legislator that people at their most vulnerable and people whose lives are ended by those who they should trust most. And I think that is an issue that has to be addressed and we need to look at going forward. Ash Regan, again, urging people to support her bill, and as someone who got my bill to a similar stage and didn't quite get the support of the government, I know this will be a nervous stage for Ash Regan, but again I think she made very strong points for the support of her bill. But also putting on record that 24-25 saw 15,000 sexual crimes recorded in Scotland, the second highest since 1971. Again, we cannot ignore these figures. There is an issue here, and we can't assume that the government are doing all the right things in this area if we are still seeing so many crimes recorded. And finally, the final word on the speakers to Carol Mockin, who I think actually summed up the debate very well and presented us all with a challenge. If we as MSPs don't fully understand all of the aspects of the root causes of violence against women and girls, how are we going to come up with the solutions? So I think it both summed up what we had all heard during the debate today, but challenged us all, and certainly those who return to this Parliament going forward, to come up with the solutions that we need. Otherwise, the statistics that Ash Regan mentioned about crimes will continue to go up. The statistics that I mentioned to Paul McLennan about the number of lives lost due to male violence, women and girls' lives lost due to male violence, that will continue to be a cause for concern and an issue that will not be addressed until we understand these root causes and we can bring forward the solutions to that. So, Presiding Officer, I think it has been an excellent debate, largely consensual. If we can't agree it's been consensual, then I think we can get behind the motion tonight. But I think what we also need is more than words, we need actions, actions to stop this happening, so we can have these debates in the future and celebrate that we have eradicated the issue of male violence against women and girls. Until that day, our job will not be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Ross. And I now call on Cocab Stewart to wind up the debate. Minister, I'd be grateful if you could take us up to just before 5 o'clock, please.
Okay. Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today's debate has been an important opportunity to discuss one of the most serious issues in society, that of violence against women in all its forms. And I agree that it has been largely consensual. It has been significant to reflect on the evolving nature of the abuse through digital tools in particular, from that coercive control via devices to online stalking, sexual harassment, technology facilitated abuse is on the rise. And it is important that we seek to prevent and tackle these new tools and approaches. So I absolutely echo the Cabinet Secretary's call to tech platforms to act to address violence against women and girls. So only together can we make progress, and the theme is unite. And that means that we all need to unite as governments, as individuals, local authorities, stakeholders, women, girls, men, boys. We all need to come together, because only by coming together can we deliver a safe online environment which women and girls can use and enjoy positively without fear and threat from others. Now, I'll have some reflections of my own, and then there have been far too many to name individuals, but I will try and pick up as many points that have been raised as possible as I proceed. But prior to that, I think, as I said, I can't reiterate enough that reflecting on online harms, it needs collective action, which brings to mind discussions that took place in this place a year ago. Back then, we focused on how to empower young people's voices, and I'm also reminded that technology-facilitated violence against women and girls was one of the areas that was raised in the Scottish Youth Parliament debate a year ago. So it's imperative that young people for whom technology is second nature inform what actions that we need to take in order to make it safer. Ensuring that young people shape our approach is absolutely vital, and that's why we are co-creating our public awareness campaign that the Cabinet Secretary discussed with young people. And I remain thoughtful of the representation of the Scottish Youth Parliament on the joint strategic board that helps the delivery of our Equally Safe strategy, which is jointly with the Scottish Government and COSLA. Their voice remains essential to ensuring our collective efforts reflect the needs and the aspirations of young people. It's equally vital that we understand online abuse, as it is connected to other forms of violence against women, because the victim survivor experiencing technology-facilitated coercive control, sexual harassment and stalking will also be experiencing those things in the physical world. We move between digital and physical spaces seamlessly. Harm committed online is felt in the real world, and it's important that we don't invent some artificial divide between the two. I will take the intervention.
Thank you, Minister, for taking that intervention. One of the themes from today, both the topical question and that's come up a couple of times in the speeches, is FGM, and it was highlighted yesterday in the Herald by Rebecca McCurdy. So will the Minister take away and find out how many women in Scotland have been treated for FGM? Thank you.
Minister.
If that data is available, I'm absolutely happy to do that. So violence against women in both the digital and the physical world is both a cause and a consequence of gender inequality. So driven by society and structural barriers across different sectors, many of which have been mentioned today. So of course we must renew our efforts to tackle this root cause. In this light, I was delighted that the Cabinet Secretary was able to highlight the public awareness campaign that we are developing to address that issue. It's significant that it seeks to both address online abuse and uses online platforms to promote its positive messages, of course, as well. I will.
Cole Hamilton.
I'm very grateful for the Minister giving way. Another thing that requires quite an urgent public awareness campaign, particularly at this time of year, Presiding Officer, is the dangers of drink spiking. I wonder if the Minister could speak to that.
Minister.
Can I proceed and come back on spiking? Thank you. Thank you very much. So, reflecting on the contributions that have been made by colleagues in the Chamber, with regards to Katie Clark, I'm able to confirm our support for the proposal from Rape Crisis Scotland and the Faculty of Advocates, which will deliver free access to independent legal advice to complainers in rape and attempted rape cases. That 3-year pilot will provide access, where desired, to an experienced court practitioner to assist complainers in giving their evidence and better understanding their existing rights. And that's going to be delivered by the expert Emma Rich Law Clinic at the University of Glasgow. So I hope that gives some information there. I turn to Maggie Chapman's call for us all to be very mindful of our own behaviours, and as part of that united effort to actually be very mindful when we are using social media platforms and to reflect on our behaviours, because after all we are providing that leadership on how we treat each other as well. So we must and should do better. With regards to Alex Cole-Hamilton, he was talking about the domestic abuse and asked for an update regarding that. So the victims, witnesses and Reform Act will put victims and witnesses at the heart of a modern and fair society. We are engaging with justice bodies and stakeholders across the sector on the implementation of the Act, as he asked for an update, and it will be phased to deliver reform in a way that is managed and doesn't disrupt the operation of the system. And with regards to spiking, Siobhan Brown MSP has written to all MSPs today with an update on spiking, so I hope that that is helpful. With regards to Michelle Thompson, she referred to many points that were raised in the Children's Commission's report, and that report is in fact referenced in the Equally Safe strategy, and there is work ongoing on engaging men and boys. The Scottish Government is, of course, undertaking a co-created campaign that was mentioned earlier to ensure that men and boys are seen as more than just part of the problem, but actually integral to the solution. So, regarding Scottish Women's Aid and the vigil and providing leadership, the Scottish Government will be supporting the annual Scottish Women's Aid's For Them All vigil, which is on the 5th of December. And that's held, of course, in honour of women and children that have been killed by abusive men, as well as women who have lost their lives to suicide that has stemmed from the experiences of abuse. And I know that my colleagues across Cabinet and indeed across the Chamber will be attending many events to highlight that very important time and to hold those women and girls in our memory. I agree with McNair's concerns that she raised about the new risks around tech-based violence, and I agree with her calls to unite around this. With regards to Rhoda Grant, who has mentioned the Ash Regan's prostitution bill, as with all members' bills, we will, of course, give it full and careful consideration. And you will be aware that the Criminal Justice Committee's scrutiny of the bill as part of Stage 1 is underway, with the Minister for Victims having given evidence earlier this month. Now, we have stated that the Scottish Government has confirmed that we strongly support the principle of legislating to criminalise those who purchase sex. And this position aligns with our Equally Safe strategy that states very clearly that prostitution is a form of violence against women and girls. So currently the Scottish Government retains a neutral stance on the bill ahead of the Parliament's continued scrutiny of the proposals. Stuart McMillan quite rightly talked about tackling misogyny and referenced the good work of the Equally Safe strategy. There is a public awareness campaign that is currently being developed, and that will be launched in February 2026. Presiding Officer, I knew that I would end up running out of time, so just a couple of seconds just to finish together. I welcome and share the ambition to eliminate violence against women and girls that I've heard in contributions today, and it is a tribute to this Parliament that we can all join together in solidarity as we continue to make progress. We must all work together, as the theme of Scotland's 16 Days campaign highlights. So therefore, I call on all in the Chamber to renew their commitment, not just during the 16 days, but every single day. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the debate on uniting local and national efforts across sectors to end violence against women and girls. And it's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is decision time. And there are 2 questions to be put as a result of today's business. The first question is that Amendment 19970.2, in the name of Tess White, which seeks to amend Motion 19970 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville on uniting local and national efforts across sectors to end violence against women and girls, be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote and there will be a short suspension to allow members to access digital voting.